Hello. So I want to talk about this idea of like personal liberty and intersections with public safety and government regulations. And mostly been thinking about this in the context of like drug decriminalization and cognitive freedom and kind of the whole stigma around people who use drugs and what we consider a drug and what is the purpose of things like the Controlled Substances Act that are designed to keep us theoretically safe from substances that would cause harm, promote disease, become addictive, things that we're chemically dependent on, um, preventing certain things in products, which isn't necessarily the Controlled Substances Act, but the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, which the FDA oversees. And so this is why we have, regulations around food, as well as drugs. And so I'm thinking about this a lot in the context of alcohol. And, alcohol used to be like they tried to crack down on alcohol in the early 20th century. You hear about bootleggers and the whole prohibition era and like speakeasies and things like that and moonshine, so and I don't know all the details of the history about what was going on at that time and why they weren't allowing people to have alcohol. I just know from my digging into it and sort of like why the government cracks down on things is that, they're like people were doing it anyway. Like even though they were saying like you can't have alcohol, you can't make it, you can't sell it, people did it anyway because people are going to do what they want to do and they'll find things around it if they're motivated enough and regardless of the laws of the current time. So I think the government recognized like this is probably causing a bigger public health issue because people are creating these highly adulterated products to get drunk that that are dangerous, and it's creating this whole underground market, and the people are revolting and they really want alcohol, so they decided to allow it, and people were allowed to make and buy and sell and consume alcohol. And then other drugs started to become kind of prevalent in the culture over the years. We've had the emergence of, cocaine and heroin and cannabis and various other very intense psychotropic drugs like psychedelics. And, things started to, I think, reach a threshold in the, 1960s during all of the like civil unrest, the civil rights movement, the protests against the Vietnam War. And at the same time, unethical research practices with some of these substances where there wasn't like ethical oversight, and you had companies putting out products that were poisoning people like thalidomide and kind of other things that were being used, cigarettes, for not having any regulations around that and not knowing how like would cause birth defects. And so there is a call for like regulating things so that people that have a more of an eye towards making money aren't harming people in that process. But when the Controlled Substances Act came into being in 1970 to crack down on a lot of other drugs of abuse like heroin and cocaine and psychedelics and cannabis, alcohol and tobacco were explicitly exempted from the Controlled Substances Act because there was already such a huge commercial market and a demand from the people. And there was a recognition, I think, that these things were dangerous and caused problems, but that we would create such an infrastructure to allow legal access through regulation and public health monitoring and updating guidelines around that messaging to the public as more information came out on what's actually happening and what are the long-term effects. So I bring this up because, there's a lot of people that struggle with alcohol dependence and abuse. It's a very dangerous drug. Same thing with cigarettes, tobacco, nicotine. And I think over the years, as our science has gotten better and we've studied these things in more detail and we've seen the long-term consequences of how frequently people drink or smoke and what kind of diseases are more prevalent with people that have that in their kind of lifestyle, and consuming behaviors, that that we see that they have significant health risks. And so we are seeing this trend now where people are observing this kind of in the public sphere and public health, arena, where alcohol is now more linked to causing cancer and other things that I think people then can say, oh, well, then I'm going to choose not to. Even though it's available, I'm choosing not to. And we're seeing that this intersection of good public health data and responsible regulations around how people can access these things really can curtail misuse of these things. And so my argument, and a lot of argument of drug prohibitionists and people that are interested in or drug people, not drug prohibitionists, but people wanting to change drug laws and wanting to abolish drug laws and provide full access. It's like, I think we can find a happy medium, but really, like, at first and foremost, not making engagement with these things a crime under decriminalization, and trusting that people, given the right information, assuming we have a good public health infrastructure to monitor disease surveillance and health risks of things that people are doing and consuming and engaging with, that if we can have a good intersection and communication structure around that and sensible regulations around that people, like, give people the benefit of the doubt that they can make good decisions about their health when they're given accurate information about what is objectively true about the risks and benefits of those things. So yeah, just want to touch on that and, recognize kind of the hypocrisy in the way that we regulate dangerous things. And I don't want to, touch on the fact that a lot of it seems to be driven by financial motivations and what is the most profitable. That's the culture that we live in the United States. We're a capitalist country. We're driven by, business development and profit and money. And that's kind of just part of what we're in. And so I think we need to be also thinking about that. As much as I don't like it, that is a big carrot on a stick for a lot of people in terms of what are they going to prioritize, what's going to be the mission of their organization, how are they going to pitch their education, how are they going to advertise for their product, and how is all that going to be communicated to lawmakers in how we structure our culture and society and laws around engagement with some of these things that people want to do. So yeah, just a little rant about that. I would really love if things like the Controlled Substances Act could be reformed and be really rigorous and solid and evidence-based and able to adapt with information that comes out, and having an eye towards scrutiny and rigor about how we use that information. And that's a long-term goal. I think amending the Controlled Substances Act is going to be a big lift, but I think it's possible, and I think we can get to a more reasonable, sensible, evidence-based regulatory system in our country if we can just trust science and trust the public and trust people with lived experience and trust those that understand kind of more than just single issue topics and can think of the full complexity of human health and culture and behavior, and really work towards kind of collaborating with people that think differently than us on some of these issues so that we can understand where the gaps are in our ability to communicate and educate each other on these things and be able to make decisions based on, like I said, ground truth, objective facts, rather than single issue mindset or politically driven policies. Thanks.